Guys, thanks for tuning in to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today is going to be a great episode with the Arizona GroundPounders guide service. That's Cash Armstrong, Steel Armstrong, and Waylon Pettet. And one thing I have to say is something happened in the connection of this episode, and all of the audio when I'm talking is going to be distorted, and I apologize. I've tried to send it through filters and work with it. It is what it is. The ground pounders come in nice and clear, so you're just going to have to bear with us on this. But they bring a lot of value in this episode, and hopefully you can listen, knowing that it was just an accident that happened. Didn't realize it till after it was already recorded, and it is what it is. So I really appreciate your patience. I want to thank you guys for your loyal support of this podcast. I want to thank the Arizona Ground Pounders for coming on. They have done an unbelievable job over the last handful of years shooting some giant bucks and bulls, and you guys are going to really get some good value out of this episode. I want to thank you guys for your support of this podcast. If you guys would like to send me a message or have a question or comment, please send me an email at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can follow along my Instagram account at jscottoutdoors. You can send me a direct message there. And just love hearing from you guys. I also want to thank the sponsors of this podcast, GoHunt.com Insider. They're the title sponsor of the podcast. And if you use the J. Scott promo code when signing up for the Go Hunt Insider, you're going to get a $50 store credit to the new Go Hunt gear shop. That's hand-picked and field-tested gear. It's free shipping. You've got great technical support there with Trail Kreitzer, and you can use those that credit or those insider points to get free gear. Just go to gohunt.com and check it out. Also, thanks to Coues Ultralight Hunting, Jason Hairston and his crew, and remind you that the Coues Mobile Showroom is touring all over the United States, the western and mid United States. And go to coues.com to check out when that mobile showroom is going to be near you. One of the great things about that is every piece of gear that Coues makes in every size will be on site at the Coues mobile showroom. So you'll be able to try everything on, touch it, feel it, figure out what size is best for you. It's just been overwhelming, the response in the cities that it's already passed through. So make sure you check that out. Also, phonescope.com, 10% off if you use the JScott16 promo code. Cheston Davis and his crew there at the Phonescope, they are able to adapt any optic to any phone, and you can take pictures and video immediately. And then the Optics Authority, Cody Nelson at the Outdoorsman's there in Phoenix, Arizona. Cody and his crew have an unbelievable supply of tripods and backpacks and other hunting gear, as well as they are the Optics Authority. You get a 10% discount if you use the JScott promo code. Guys, again, I'm sorry for the distortion that you're going to hear. It was a bad connection or something. It's never happened before, but I just felt like this episode, there was too much value in this episode to scrap it. So if you would, just be patient with it. And I hope you'll be able to kind of get through the bad audio on my portion and get all the little jewels and nuggets that the ground pounders bring to this. So thanks, guys. Let's get right to it. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today I've got a special episode here with the Arizona Ground Pounders. I've got Cash Armstrong, Steel Armstrong, and Waylon Pettet on the phone. Guys, how you doing?
Good. Good. How you doing, Jay?
Great. It's going to be awesome to talk to you guys. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast here for some time, but we've got the Arizona deer and sheep and fall kind of regulations. Our draw is coming up here Tuesday, June 13th, and I wanted to make sure to get you guys on the podcast and get this episode aired before that deadline. And one of the things that I want to specifically talk with you guys about today is Coues deer. And you guys are young guys, and you've got a lot of energy, and you've got a lot of go, and you guys have killed some tremendous bucks, some of the best Coues deer bucks, in the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years. You guys have been, knocking them down, and you guys are young, and you're full of energy, and you're really good at what you do. And I know a lot of people have taken notice of the hard work that you've put in and the success that has come from all of that hard work. And so wanted to pick your brain specifically about units 22 and 23. Because that's kind of the main stomping grounds that you guys run around in. Before we get to that, we're sitting here in June, and elk season is not too far away. I just kind of wanted to get a general sense from you guys of conditions. How do you anticipate the 23 elk season with, the archery hunt coming first, and then early rifle hunts, and then the late hunts? What's your forecast for this year for elk?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a phenomenal year. A lot of green feed, good antler growth. I think some people are going to kill some giants.
Cash, I believe this is Cash speaking, right?
Yes, sir.
Cash, we're kind of in our dry period right now before our monsoon season. How would you compare, the winter moisture, the spring moisture? Is it just average? Is it above average? Is it below? And, have we gotten any showers in that country, say in the last 30 days? And you speak of green feed. I mean, is it starting to sprout everywhere, or is it, average, but below or above average?
I would say, above average. We had a storm 2 weeks ago, came through, drizzled pretty good. And I'd say, too, with that winter precipitation on there, like Roosevelt Lake's like almost at 70% full right now. A lot of the streams and a lot of the creeks are still flowing right now, too. So there's a lot of extra water and feed down in the bottoms of the canyons. So hopefully we can just have a good monsoon season come through. And then if we have that, those bulls can finish off great.
Yeah, and Waylon, that's Waylon Pettet there speaking, right?
Yes, sir.
Guys, how important is it, the bulls have been growing? I mean, I would suspect that a bunch of the bulls are already, 6-point bulls, and, you can really tell what they are. How important is it that the monsoons come on time as far as you talk about finishing those bulls out? I mean, have you seen it, or do you anticipate if you have an early, say, maybe the last couple days of June and we get, good storms early, do you really anticipate like their back ends just, finishing really strong? And have you seen it years where it's a late monsoon, maybe it doesn't hit till 15th or 20th, that maybe the back end's a little bit stunted?
No, definitely, I would agree with that. Like with last year, there were a lot of bulls that had pretty good front ends because they had some precipitation early on in the year, and then it kind of dried out through that time where they finished off their tops. We also saw last year that there were a few bulls that the horn density wasn't as strong. We had a lot of broken bulls on the early hunts because of just the density, because they didn't have the feed that they needed.
Yeah, you guys have done not only phenomenal on those early hunts, but you've had great success on those late hunts. What do you attribute your late hunt bull success to? What are the biggest factors that you guys have done well on those late hunts, killing big bulls?
Being in the woods, being on our feet, checking spots, and making sure we're glassing a lot, waiting for the big bulls to show up and get into their winter country. The right weather is everything.
When you say the right weather, obviously I think you mean cold, crisp, snow, as much weather as possible, and gets those bulls out moving and gets them, out feeding and out in the open a little bit more?
Yeah, gets them out on them slope and south facing slopes where the feed doesn't freeze as hard. And I think that's how we've killed a couple of the big bulls. The only reason we've killed a couple of the big bulls we have, because they live in places normally where it's unhuntable.
You guys are houndsmen, and you guys, cash and steal. Waylon, how much chasing lions do you do with these guys, or is it mainly cash and steal and Levi?
It's mainly cash and steal on there. Me and Levi would prefer, honestly, to go out and glass while these guys chase lions. But cash and steal spend the majority of the time in the spring line hunting, and it's pretty much every day as soon as the deer hunts are over, all the way until May. They're line hunting out there. So they're finding new country. They're finding new areas where deer live, where elk live, and I think that's where a lot of our success comes from, is because they're following lions into where lions are hunting themselves. So we're going to go ahead and find big game where they go.
Yeah, cash and steal specifically, you guys are literally born and raised up there in that Payson area. And, I know your dad, since you guys were little boys, was hauling you around probably before you could even walk really well, and trying to keep up with him. You mentioned going in new areas and such, and I think it's important to point out that, you guys know that country as good as anybody up there, but the country's so big. Specifically, you're always learning new little pockets and new little places. I was just wondering if you could speak to that, and maybe, tell me and the listeners how, even as well as you know the country, how important it is to be continually out there walking and, dropping off this ridge line into this hole and that hole, and how much you learn by doing that and being on the ground, on your feet all the time.
Yeah, Jay, that's everything in my opinion. Because, I mean, you read the sign and the sign tells you where the game's at, You're not wasting all that time because you know where the deer are already,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Steele, have you guys gone into particular country chasing lions that you had never really looked at for deer, and maybe you're finding all sorts of lion kills, or you're finding deer sheds, and have you found spots specifically by just chasing the dogs and ending up in country that you never even thought of or dreamed of being in, and all of a sudden you're smack dab right in the middle? Or have you jumped big Coues deer bucks while chasing those dogs and didn't even know that buck was here?
Oh, yeah, that happens. That's how we find a lot of our deer, And just you find the high densities of deer, and then you say, oh, I'm going to come back in here and put some time into it,
One question I would have, guys, is, you guys are really successful in actually, killing lions and actually, chasing lions and getting lions killed. Have you guys seen areas that you guys have specifically killed lions out of that you watch in future years because you've known you've killed a lion or two out of there? And have you actually seen, hands-on experience, have you actually seen pockets where you've killed lions out of that you've actually helped the deer numbers?
Oh, for sure. That has a really big part, I that's my opinion, but I mean, we've killed multiple bucks out of the same spot, and then we killed, right here behind the house, we've caught over 30 lions in the last 10 years right here, and the deer population's thriving now.
Do you think let me back up. It's always been said that a lion kills a deer a week. You guys are out in the field more than anybody that I know, constantly all year. Would you agree with that assessment? I've been curious to ask this question for guys like yourself that would know the answer.
I don't believe that, but maybe one every 2 weeks, but there's a lot of javelina in our country, and lions love javelina, skunks. They can eat a jackrabbit and they can go for a week, you know what I mean? So they don't have to kill a deer a week, you know.
Do you guys, do you notice, well, let me see. Do you notice that the lions, do they specifically have a preference over, you know, Coues deer or mule deer? Have you ever been able to tell whether, you know, they really like Coues deer or they really like mule deer, or do you think it's a matter of where they live, or I'm curious your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it just depends which country you're in. Right here, there's not a lot of mule deer left, you know. They're starting to come back a little bit. So I would say mainly in 22, they're going to kill more Coues deer. In 23, they kill both. You know, there's a little better mule deer population over there.
How often do you guys trail a lion and let it go on a percentage basis? You know, as far as, you know, 5 out of 10 times you let it go, 2 out of 10 times, 8 out of 10 times. I'm curious about that.
Well, we try to let the majority of the females go, because I mean that's what brings the toms back into the country is the females. So that's kind of the way we do it. I mean, if we have a client and he wants the lion, I mean it's up to him in the end, but we try to kill big toms only.
You know, that's always interesting to me. You know, you guys love deer, you love elk, but you also love lions. And I've done a few podcasts with lion hunters, and you know, they have the same, you guys and they, talking about lion hunters, have the same reverence for lions as, say, I would for a bull elk, or I would for, you know, a trout, or something that I enjoy to do. Is it that same type of thing where, like, a lot of people that don't hunt lions are like, yeah, kill them all. We want to kill them all because we want the deer and elk to thrive. But I always hear from you guys, like, you guys love chasing lions enough, you don't want to kill them all, right?
Yeah, for sure. And there's so many good lion hunters out there these days. I think you gotta put that on yourself, you know, because if everybody kills everything, there won't be no lions left, you know.
Yeah, I think one question I would have for you guys is there way more lions out in 22 and 23 than people think? And I'm talking about general, like general hunter people that really don't, you know, necessarily, you know, they're not out like you are. Would you say there's more or less lions than people think?
I think there's more, but like a big tom, his range can be huge, you know, so 60, 70-mile circle, you know. But lions, they kind of congregate together too, you know. They use a piece of country, you know what I mean? You might go a month without finding any tracks, you know. And then we go right across into 23, and that's where all the lions are hanging out, you know, in a 10-mile square, and they're all leaving it. But they kind of just move around together, you know,
Would you
in my
guys say
opinion.
would you guys say that there's more lions in 22 or more lions in 23 if you had to guess?
I would say probably more lions in 23 because of the reservation line. They don't get hunted as hard over there, and they can come across freely, you know.
So in other words, it gives
But
them a little bit of a
they're
sanctuary?
yeah, for sure, especially for big lions. That's where we catch our giants, is coming off that reservation. They get the age, you know.
So in other words, though, they can be sanctuary on the res, but they could end up, you know, they could end up way over on the west side of 23 or over into 22 and go all the way back. So, you know, with that 50 or 60 mile radius, I mean, that's nothing for them to, you know, be, you know, over on the res line on the east side of 23 and be way over on Tonto Creek, you know, a week later, right?
Oh yeah, in a matter of days, they can do that stuff. You know, that's what you realize. Also, you know, you figure out how to travel through the country like a lion does, and you realize that all the country just ties into each other, 22 and 23.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And speaking about, you know, learning how those lions travel, do you guys learn specifically deer travel and deer patterns, and how much deer behavior do you learn from following those lines?
Oh, I mean, it's everything. You find the pockets. That's what we look for, you know. You know, in the higher country, there's pockets of deer, you know, and then the further you go south, the more deer population you get into, but it's still pocketed, you know. That you just got to find those pockets.
You bring up a good point there. A lot of people don't realize that Coues deer are a little different than, say, mule deer, I think, because they are pockety, and you know, you've got units like 22 and 23 where, you know, you've got good densities of deer, but they're not everywhere, and they're in certain places. Is there anything in particular, uh, and I'd like to get all three of you's opinion, if there's anything in particular that you notice that Coues deer, you know, happen to congregate around, or if you see a spot you say this is going to be a good deer spot. Curious, you know, what characteristics of country do you think makes, you know, for a good pocket?
Yeah, this is steel. I always look for, like, you know, water that's kind of singled out or something, you know, or there's an edge there, something that's like a defined point, you know, and then that's a good place to start, you know.
When you say define point, do you mean like a ridge line that's got a little bit of open and got access to thick, like just like a little cubby hole type of you know, like a place where they can come out and get some sun and get some of that feed, but then get back and get some cover?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Just all game likes an edge, you know. That's and bass is the same way. We learned a lot about bass doing that bass fishing, you know. They
What
always
about
like they travel the edge, you know.
what about Cash and Waylon? You guys have anything to add in that?
Yeah, this is Waylon here. I think that a big thing is just feed too. A lot of the deer will find places where there's feed year round, so they don't have to travel that much. So the combination of having feed, water, and then protected area where they can go from sun to shade and shade back to sun when the winter changes back into summer.
Yeah, I
Because they
think
do like to have that home area, and usually a good big buck is within 1 to 2 miles of where you find it when you do find that buck.
that's a great, that leads to all sorts of questions there. One question I would have for you guys on some of the biggest bucks you guys have killed. I mean, some of the biggest bucks you've killed. How big of a range? And let's talk about everything except for the rut. Let's just talk about, you know, say 11 months out of the year. What the biggest bucks you've killed, how tight or small or big of a range would you say they have?
Oh, this is Cash, Jay. I would say a half mile to a mile. And then sometimes we've had a buck just leave for a while, and you don't know how far he goes. But they always come back. That's what people don't need to realize. I always tell everybody, where'd you see him? And I'd say that's where you need to be. That's where you need to stay right there, because they will come back through there.
Cash, you talk about a walkabout, and I love Coues deer, and I've been studying them for a long time, and I talk to a lot of people, and I always hear that word, a walkabout, like they just take off. It, is there any pattern to those deer just taking off and going on a walkabout and then coming back, like time of year? Like, do you see a specific pattern, and then all of a sudden in X month, they take off, and then all of a sudden, they show back up 2 or 3 weeks later? Have you noticed, or any of you guys noticed, particular bucks, like always in, first 10 days of October, or, third week in July, or whatever? Have you noticed a pattern change?
Yeah, on the biggest buck we ever killed, it was like that. But a lot of it depends on the country you're in too, you know.
It,
And I think a lot of those big giants, they wander a lot, you know. They can go wherever they want as long as they got the right cover, you know.
yeah, talk a little bit more about, you said it depends on the country. Do you mean if it's thicker country, they're going to wander less, or if it's more open, they're going to wander more? Just curious to pick in there a little bit.
I think it varies mostly off of water. Summertime they're going to have to they get out of their element more because sometimes the water dries up, and they'll go a little further. But that's what's crazy is they know where the water is at all times. There's in my opinion, there's kind of two types of deer. There's deer that are like spring deer and like tank deer. They hang a little tighter. They don't travel as far. But like canyon deer that drink out of creeks and streams, I think they have more of a tendency to roam a little more.
I think those roamers are, probably enough to make all you guys pull your hair out. It's those bucks that have those tight circles. I'm sure that you lick your chops, when you've seen a buck, you jump them lion hunting, you glass them up, you get some trail camera pics, like you're waiting for the season to start. And then there's been those particular bucks that are roamers that probably just drive you nuts, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. My dad killed a big 3-point a few years back, and that was the easiest buck I've ever hunted. I mean, big buck. I mean, he was like clockwork. You go in there and you found him. Within about a 400-yard square, that's where he lived. And it might have changed, but that was in October, and that's when they're the most vulnerable, when they come out of velvet, in my opinion. In velvet and then right when they come out.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So regardless of the actual hunting season, so no hunting season, just talking about times of year, is there a certain 30-day period or 2-week period or 60-day period where you think they have the tightest circle of all? Meaning, is there any time that you could say, yeah, Coues deer bucks the month of August stay the most stationary, or when would that time frame be?
What I think it's right the period as soon as they get out of the velvet and they kind of move from the velvet country to where they're going to be for October. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll find a buck as he's actually scraping the velvet off, and he'll go to a spot, and we'll have that buck that's within a spot within a half mile all the way from October until early November, until they get into that pre-rut time. And that's the time where we kill a lot of our biggest bucks because we have them found in the summertime, go back in, re-find the deer right there in October just as soon as the elk hunts get over, find those bucks, and then go back in, surround those deer with our team, and then go back in during the hunts and kill those bucks in October.
Okay, so you said something there very interesting. You're saying a lot of your deer have kind of their summer where you see them all summer, you get them on trail camera, or you're glassing them up all summer, and you're saying that a lot of them move a little bit. My question would be, how far? Are they moving half mile, or are they moving 3 miles over? A lot of the guys I've talked to in southern Arizona, they say where they are in the summer is where they are for that, beginning of that October hunt, that first hunt. They're right there in the same country. And you may be saying that. You may be just saying they're moving over, a quarter or a half mile. I'm curious there. I'm always curious about deer movement. Exactly how far from summer country do they move, once they rub their velvet?
I mean, we've seen them move as far as 5 miles, but more times than not, it's a half mile. Good. They go to that shady slope and just hang out, where the feed's right. And it usually happens, right? They usually rub their velvet where we watch them all summer and then move. And then they go nocturnal too, but if you know where they're at, you just sit there and wait them out.
That's all great stuff. Very, very good stuff. I'm sorry to pick too much there, but all that stuff just intrigues me. I want to talk about Unit 22 and 23 and have you guys kind of compare and contrast the two units, and maybe talk a little bit. Let's talk about deer densities first. In comparison to 22 and 23, which one do you think has the most deer, and which one has, lesser deer densities and higher deer densities?
I would say like 22 South, Matazelle country. It's got the highest deer density in my opinion.
Why do
And
you think that
then
is? Why?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. There's a lot of feed there, but there's a lot of feed a lot of other places too. So I can't really be honest with you and tell you that because I don't know.
Okay. So the southern end, kind of the Matazelle type country of 22's got a high density, and compare that, say, with 23.
I mean, 22 north and 23 north, I'd say it's about equal. You know, don't get me wrong, you're gonna find those pockets where you're like, holy cow, there's so many deer in here. But then you might go 10 miles and not see anything. You know.
That's what makes it so challenging. I think that's what makes Coues deer so intriguing, especially in these central Arizona units, is they're much more pockety than, say, the deer down south, in the southern Arizona units, where it seems like they're pretty widespread and not quite as pockety. How much does elk, being around, do you think, move Coues deer in or out, or do you think the elk bother the Coues deer at all?
It does from time to time. Sometimes if they're on water, but like last year, we had video of two bucks, of both bucks that we ended up killing in the October hunt, a 122 buck and 119 buck, and they lived together with bulls that we were chasing on the early elk hunt. I mean, they drank from the same tank. They lived on the same flat. Every morning when we would glass the elk, we would see one of those two bucks crossing by the tank where the elk were rutting. Wow. So I think a lot of times that the deer during the rut will lay down and not get up during the actual rutting portion because they just can't hear or see what they want to see because there's so much commotion going on in the woods. But I don't think that they leave or get pushed out because of that rut activity. I think they just lay down.
Yeah, it makes sense. Stay put and lay down and just lay low.
Mm-hmm. Because, and that's what a lot of people don't realize is what a Coues deer will do is if they get pressured, they don't have to move. If they can find shade and they've already drank that day, they don't have to go anywhere. And their best option, if something's a long ways away, is for them to lay down in cover and be that gray ghost that they are and just wait it out. And I've seen bucks do that where they've waited out hunters, waited out elk, to where they'll just lay down and not move until they feel safe again.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I want to ask all three of you, if your favorite unit is 22 or 23, and see if you all have the same answer, or see if any of you differ. Any one of you can start.
Jay, this is Cash. I like 23 because I know I can find a giant bull, maybe, and a giant buck in the same canyon, and that's why we hunt 23.
Okay, Steve.
Jay, this is go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm right there with Cash. I like 23 myself because the bulls are bigger over there, so you get to kill two birds with one stone,
Yeah. How about you, Waylon?
I prefer 23 as well. It's kind of funny, too, because we've actually killed the biggest buck we've ever killed in Unit 22, and we've also killed two additional bucks over 131 in Unit 22, but I just prefer 23. I think it's because it's more of a wilderness-type unit. You can get away from people more, and the country is a little bit more broken up, and we don't have Highway 87 going through the middle of the unit where everyone kind of has easy access. You kind of have to work to get to places, and I like that in a unit.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Would you guys agree, though, that if 22 did not have the numbers of elk tags, meaning if 22's elk quality, I'm going to throw it right back at you guys here, if 22's elk quality was every bit as good as 23, would that change your opinion of whether you like 22 or 23, or would it remain the same?
No, definitely. I think it would, because I think when it comes to Coues deer, they're actually equal units on size of bucks. It's just that we spend so much time in preparing for the early 23 archery and rifle hunts and the late rifle hunts for elk that we spend so much time there, we just find additional bucks. When we go to look in Unit 22, we go to look for deer. When we go to Unit 23, we go to look for deer and elk at the same time. And I think too, with getting off tangent, but that the tag numbers in Unit 22, I think have just taken that unit, and it used to be a unit to where people would kill 380-inch bulls, sometimes 400-inch bulls on those hunts, and the bulls are just not getting the age now because there's 800 tags in a unit that's 1/3 the size of Unit 23. Like Unit 22 North is only 1/3 the size of Unit 23. So there's 800 late tags in there, and the bulls aren't getting up in age. They're not getting to 13, 14, 15 years old where they have the giant bases and 65 inches of mass. A lot of people are killing good 330-inch bulls, but they're only 6 or 7 years old. They have potential to be that, but I think the unit's just not managed correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of tags. I think it's more of an opportunity unit, for sure. And I totally get what you guys are saying. Like, you love 20, you like them both, but, if you had to pick, because I asked you which one if you had to pick, and you picked 23, and it's because, one, you spend more time there, two, you have all the memories of chasing giant bulls, and it also has, giant Coues deer, so it's kind of a perfect fit.
Definitely. And like I said, when we killed the governor tag buck, the 147 deer, I mean, that was in Unit 22, and we've also had great success in 22 with Coues deer. And I think that the potential for deer to grow in both units is exactly the same, and I think it's the same way with elk, too. I just don't think they just give the elk enough time or age to be as great as they are in 23.
Yeah, makes total sense. Let's talk a little bit about hunting pressure. Comparing 22 and 23, and for this conversation, let's talk about the 22 and 23 early hunts, and I'll refer here to the regulations just so the listener knows. In Unit 22, the first hunt is October 27th through November 2nd, and there's 400 tags in 22, and now this year there's a second hunt, November 10th through the 16th, and there's another 400 tags. And then in 23, the same dates are 300 tags on the first hunt and 275 tags on the second hunt. Obviously, by just looking at the numbers, 22's got way more tags than 23. But specifically on those two early hunts, how does the pressure feel? Does it feel the same, or does it feel can you feel those extra numbers in 22?
Well, I think since they split the hunts up, because there used to be more tags during the October hunt, I feel like it's decreased the pressure on there because they cut those tags in half in both units. There used to be the high number of tags in both units just during the October hunt. And it's better for guides as well because we also get to have a chance to take guys on an October hunt, take a week off, and take guys on a November hunt too. The last year before the hunt was split in 22 and 23, it seemed like that there were hunters everywhere. I think there were 700 tags that year in 22, and it felt like everyone had a tag and everyone brought 3 or 4 people. So there were 3,000 people in the woods at the same time looking for these same Coues deer. With that split, I think that the Game and Fish did a good job on there, to where they decreased the number of people in the woods at the same time, and also are giving the hunters a better opportunity to kill a good buck by splitting those up too. Definitely.
Well, one thing I would say in just playing the devil's advocate a little bit is I totally hear what you're saying about splitting the hunt. I think it's great for guys like yourself because now you're going to have the opportunity to take, because you guys really know the unit, you're going to have the opportunity to take guys on the first hunt and guys on the second hunt and have really good success. Playing the devil's advocate a little bit, I totally hear your point there. But what about the fact that, if there's 700 tags, guys go for like the first 2-3 days and then they're done, and then, 3/4 of them are gone back to the valley and they're not hunting anymore. When they do these, split seasons where they've got 2 early hunts now, in essence, you have less people, but you have a new group coming in the second week that's all fired up, whereas when they had it all together, there's only about 10% of the hunters are really, gung-ho, fired up, and then they end up, hunting for 2 or 3, 4 days, and then they're done. and gone, doesn't it actually put more pressure on the actual animal themselves by having two groups of gung-ho hunters instead of just one main group? And, it may be hot and they have 3 tough days and they go home. Curious what your thoughts are across the board there, guys.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. I mean, most guys, they don't hunt the whole hunt, so you're definitely right there.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I'm right. It's just something I think about, and I understand why the Game and Fish does what they do, because, people complain that, like you said, Waylon, there was 700 people out there hunting, and the experience was bad. Well, now you split it, they've got it, two groups of 400. That's, a lot less people, but you're going to have two groups that are, gung-ho, ready, fired up about their hunt, which will probably ultimately put a little bit more pressure on the deer. I'm curious to see how the numbers work out. Now, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this second hunt, is this the first year in 22 and 23 that they're offering this second style hunt?
No, this is the second or third year that they've offered that.
Okay.
We took hunters in October, November. I believe this is the third year.
Okay.
On there. We've had that. And they split up, and I like it on there just because it's giving people a chance to be in the woods, and there not be as many people at the same time.
Okay.
And I don't think personally, this is Waylon, I don't think personally that pressure over that amount of time affects the deer as much as people think it does. I think that what happens, I've seen a lot of times to where people have missed a buck, and us as well, where our hunters have missed a buck, and we found that same buck in the same area the very next day. So I don't know if it's the same as elk, because sometimes, I know if you push an elk out of a country, an elk will run until they feel safe, and they'll go somewhere new. I really feel that the deer, especially the Coues deer, wants to leave, be safe, and then come back to their home.
Yeah, so, and that's where they live. I agree with that. I've seen it more times than not that, guys shoot at a big buck, and then, the next day they're like, yeah, I shot at a big buck, and I'm like, where? And they're like, way over. I'm like, well, that's like 10 miles from here. Why are you hunting here? Oh, he's spooked. I would argue, no, he's not. He'll be back in that country. Wait him out. He'll come. You'll find him again.
Yeah, for sure. I got a good story about that. The biggest buck, this is Steele, the biggest buck I ever killed, we watched him a long time, in about 3 years, and we had him patterned pretty good, but he was a tough deer to hunt. We'd see him about every 7 to 10 days, and finally, about the 6th day of the October deer hunt, we found him. I had a 400-yard shot, missed him, and he run over the hill, and most guys would have turned around and went home, but I went and got right where he went over and sat on a rock. Sure enough, he jumped up at 80 yards, and I shot him, and that's how I killed the biggest deer I've ever killed.
I remember that deer. Wasn't it a big, giant, typical 3x3?
Yes, sir.
I remember that deer. That was an awesome deer. Guys, let's talk about your use of trail cameras, and over the years, what you have learned from trail cameras.
I think trail cameras are a tool that you should use like in your tool belt, but it's not something that we, as an outfit, depend on. A lot of times we'll put them in certain areas, or if we see a buck and we want to keep tabs on a buck, we'll set a camera. A lot of times trail cameras are really important for elk, but really the biggest bucks that we find those bucks actually in the fields glassing. And it's a lot of people say, oh, how many cameras do you have? And we have a few cameras, and we use them, but it's a majority of the big deer that we found those deer with glass. I'm trying to go back through right now and think about all the bucks that we've killed over 120, and I don't think any of those bucks, the first time we saw those bucks, was on a trail camera. It was either scouting during the hunt, bear hunting with glass. But we will go back in. If we find a big buck, we will go back in and set a camera where we need to. just to see where he's going or try to pattern that buck so we have a chance to kill that buck during a hunt.
Yeah, I totally get it. There's been a whole, obviously you guys I'm sure have heard all the nonsense and this and that and, just about trail cameras and
Mhm.
I'm just curious your thoughts if they were to outlaw trail cameras, which I want to go on record saying I hope they don't ban trail cameras outright. Do I think in some of the units like the Strip and Unit 9 and some of the places where, there's 15, 20 cameras on one water hole, do I think they need to probably do something about that? Yes. But I think there's so many great things that can come from trail cameras. But let's just throw that out. Let's just say that if they did throw out trail cameras, do you think you guys would continue to kill giant bucks like you already do?
Yes, with 100% certainty. It's just we use them as a tool, but it would just take a couple more days to find the deer, or it would take a few more times going to glass or surrounding the area completely with the guys we have to re-find the buck instead of setting a camera and kind of figuring out where he was. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times, too, it helps to have trail cameras because you can scout while you're not there. It also lets people don't see someone going in and out of the country, so people don't get an idea of where a buck is. And also, we can be somewhere else scouting while that trail camera is set, too. So it is like a hand or helper in the field, but we would continue to kill bucks 100% certainty if they outlawed trail cameras today.
Don't you think, too, sometimes, using trail cameras, if you guys had a big giant buck and you went in and just flooded the country with cameras, someone could potentially catch on to that, oh, the ground pounder guys are, they're going in and out of here checking cameras. Like, sometimes I think from a strategic play, if you've got a big buck, you kind of maybe don't even go in that country and just leave them be, and the least you can get in there and be around is probably the better. Would you guys agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, for sure. We've dealt with that quite a bit in certain countries, and then we have certain countries where we can go in and we won't see anybody, you know what I mean? But you're definitely right there.
Yeah.
And we do too. So we see a lot of outfitters who spend their entire day checking cameras and instead of glassing. And we would prefer to not check the cameras the entire day and to glass the entire day because, as you know, Coues deer will move anytime, day or night, and we want to be there when they stand up to find that buck and get them on actual video.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Unit 22 specifically here. And would all of you kind of go through, anyone listening to this podcast, obviously, if they want a great guide service, they can call you and talk to you about your service. But let's also just talk about areas in general, speaking about 22 specifically. Maybe starting, from high to low. Talk about some of the different access points. Talk about, some of the general areas for people that are listening that, want to go and do the hunt on their own. Kind of break the unit down and tell me about Unit 22.
Yeah, Unit 22 is pretty unique because the elevation changes so much. I mean, you can go from the edge of the range where you're almost at 7,000 feet to where you're on your way actually down to the valley, and you are finding Coues deer at 2,700 feet elevation there. So there's a giant change there, and there's a change because there's wilderness areas inside the unit where you can be completely away from anybody, and there's Coues deer there, or you could be right next to a town and find a good Coues buck there too. The densities, like Steele said earlier, there's a lot more deer in the southern portion of the unit in the lower elevations, low country, prickly pear cactus type elevations. There's more deer there. I honestly think that with that deer density, there are also more hunters go into that deer density. So the more deer there are, the more hunters go there, and that doesn't allow the deer to attain the age to where they become a trophy class buck. We like to hunt a lot of times in the mid-country because in October it's definitely cooler. In the high country, it's a lot cooler. And we see that with more cover with these Coues deer, a lot of times, the bigger bucks. And because those Coues deer are attaining age, and people don't like to look into a place all day long and see 2 or 3 deer in a day, and that's something that we thrive on.
So in other words, you are not necessarily hunting in the highest density countries. You're hunting in places where you know specific pockets, and are you pretty much, once the hunt starts, always hunting a particular deer?
Yeah, for sure. That's how we like it to be. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it doesn't work like that, but I'd say about 95% of the time we got the buck picked out we're going to kill. And sometimes we kill them and sometimes we don't. But I think that's how you increase your odds, you know. If you know that you're hunting a buck, you know you're going to stay there the whole hunt, and he's going to mess up. You know, you just got to be in the right spot to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So in talking about Unit 22, you know, the times that I've hunted, you know, you can be up there on the rim, you know, Milk Ranch Point, and, you know, working the edge of the rim, glassing off the top of the rim. You can be up there off the control road. There's lots of access points, you know, where you can glass up into the rim, and then you've got over on the other side, you've got, you know, Hardscrabble Mesa, you've got, you know, that Twin Peaks Trail, you've got that, you know, Polish Mesa, you know, there's a bunch of high country stuff up there that a lot of it looks the same, and I think for people that don't really know the country, it's kind of hard to figure out where those deer are. In speaking specifically about high country bucks in 22, is there any one particular advice that you could give to people about trying to find deer? I mean, obviously there's water, but from a glassing standpoint, you just try and, you know, find any kind of knobs that you can and just, you know, glass as much as you can, or you know, what kind of high country strategy would you tell someone to maybe take hunting specifically high country? And I guess for that matter, this could roll over into, you know, some of the 23 country that's, you know, along the 260, you know, maybe some of the Canyon Creek, maybe, you know, up off the top of the rim, you know, all that kind of country is how would someone go about tackling the high country?
I think you got to go into an area and you got to hunt. You got to hunt. A lot of people, in my opinion, they glass too much country up in that thick stuff. And then you get overwhelmed because you're looking at too much. You can't really pick it apart. So, like, you know, take a smaller piece of country and just and pick it apart, you know. And then angles is everything. You know, getting the right angle on a piece of country, the vantage points are everything. And a lot of people, they just sit and glass a lot, and that's what you do during the hunt. But, you know, if you want to figure out a piece of country, in my opinion, you got to go walk it. And then you read the sign, you find the deer trails. That's the biggest key, in my opinion.
I think that's super good advice for any type of hunting, but specifically the high country, you know, can be hard to figure out for sure. And I think getting on the ground and seeing where those deer tracks are, because they're not everywhere, are they? I mean, you know, once you kind of figure out where the deer, you know, you see deer tracks, you know they've walked there. I mean, it sounds elementary, but it's kind of going back to basics. I think that's a good point. Let's talk about some of that. Let's go back and talk about 22, some of that central country. You know, we talked about that. You know, there's the Doll Baby Ranch. There's all that Matazelle country. You know, I think there's a ton of country in the Matazelles there. You know, you can take, what is there, 5 or 6 or 7 different like trailheads that you can actually walk for, you know, 8, 10, 12, 15 miles and get way back in some of that country and explore. And I think just a lot of people are, one, they're afraid of it. 2, they're, you know, overwhelmed. You know, they're maybe afraid to get in there. But, you know, 22 does offer, you know, quite a bit of access points in that central country, you know, that around that Rye on both sides of the highway, you know, all the way over to Tonto Creek, you know, the river, and, you know, Mount Ord, you know, is covered with deer. all the way down to Sunflower. That's, kind of that mid-country. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. All that country you just talked about's got the highest density, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there's big bucks there too, But in our motto is, in the higher country, you got to look at 20 bucks to find a giant. Down there, you're going to have to look at 50 or 75 bucks to find a giant. So, and up here in the high country, 20 deer, 20 bucks, that don't sound like very many, but when you go out and you see a doe all day, it takes a while to get to 20.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about the high country that, shies a lot of people away is you can literally you could go days and not see a Coues deer, but you sit there on the fifth day, and you just sat there and sat there and sat there and you've seen one doe, and all of a sudden a giant could walk out. But it takes the right person to sit somewhere for 3 or 4 days. Even when you know there's a deer there, your mind plays tricks on you, and you're like, "Let's go. This sucks." You don't. But that's what makes the high risk, high reward type thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely the way it is. And if you got a buck found, you got to keep a positive attitude, and guys don't realize what that can do to you. Just knowing what you're going to get done.
Yeah.
Having confidence is everything.
A good story on that is the same way. It's with that when we hunted the governor tag buck, and it was in some high country. We went and looked over and over again for this buck. We had the buck found for 2 years, and we knew he was going to blow up into a giant. We had the buck on video when we originally glassed him. We went back in and went to look for the buck to actually hunt the deer. That buck, for a 3-day period, there was that buck and one smaller deer were the only deer that we glassed as a group of 5 people looking for that buck.
Oh, man.
So, we were there. It was in August. We were glassing for 13, 14 hours of light per day with 5 guys. We had all of our sets of our 15s. We had 12s. We were pounding every single inch of that with the cowas on there. And those were the only 2 deer that we found for that period was the actual governor buck that went 147 and another buck that hung out with him about 50 to 100 yards away from him every day. And those were the only deer that we found for that period.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And for the everyday hunter that's just, that's their one hunt of the year, it's really hard for someone, even if a guy, driving down the road, the buck runs across the road, like, he's going to go, "Oh, I saw a big buck," but very rarely is someone going to be like, "I'm going to stay right here in this country till I kill that buck or the season ends." They want to see deer. And let's talk about some of that southern country in 22. And I would ask you guys, like, what's the lowest place you've seen Coues deer? Like, I've seen them around that Ballantine trailhead. I've seen them down there right up off, you guys were helping your uncle a couple of years ago down there on that sheep hunt, some of that country, but, almost a canyon lake, seen Coues. I was curious, where have you seen Coues, or is there any place that would just surprise somebody?
Yeah, we've seen quite a few Coues deer down there by Apache Lake hunting lions, and like you said, on the sheep hunt a few years ago. Yeah, that's probably the lowest in 22 that we've seen them.
Do you think that the Four Peaks Wilderness, do you think that's overhunted, underhunted, overrated, underrated? That country all around there just always intrigues me.
Yeah, I believe that there's giant Coues deer there, and you just got to go put the time in is what it takes, And yeah, you're probably going to see more 85, 90-inch bucks, but there are those true giants that live in that country, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Unit 23, and go from, say, high to low, high being, Coles Ranch, Christopher Creek along the rim, Christopher Mountain, Canyon Creek, and then, taking the Young Road access point down towards Young. You've got some pockets there as you drop down to young. You've got Naglin Rim. Um, you've got that country all the way down into young, and then you've got the middle country. I'm curious, you guys' thoughts on that high country there.
Yeah, for sure. All that country you talked about is great country, and the higher country is going to be a little tougher. That's just all there is to it. But it can pay off in a big way, or you can go home with the tag.
Yeah, and then as you drop down there in 23, you've got the big drainage. You've got Cherry Creek drainage that goes heads basically straight south, and guys can access that Cherry Creek road off every side. Down there Pendleton Mesa. All the way down to Aztec Peak, kind of on the east side of the unit. Then they can take the Young Road and basically use the Young Road, and once they get in Young, they can go out west, out towards the Flying W, and take all those roads all the way back towards Tonto Creek, and then they can keep going, south out of Young towards Bryant Mountain, and then they can look off the Cherry Creek, looking east down into Cherry Creek, and all the way down to Aztec Peak, and then to the west there you've got that Picture Mountain. There's just a ton of country in Unit 23. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing that we like about 23 too is that everything you just talked about, you can find a good spot to glass on there. A lot of that country is so rough and so inaccessible by other hunters that you have a great chance to find that pocket and find a good buck in anything you just talked about. From the pine trees where you're glassing with pines to all the way down to where you're finding Coues bucks by saguaros. I mean, it's just such a big difference in the country and how it lays out. But the Coues bucks that we find throughout the unit, they're all bucks that have a chance to be giant, no matter if they're in the saguaros or up in the pines, or even sometimes at the edge of fir trees.
Wouldn't you guys agree that the higher density in 23 is going to be down off Roosevelt Lake, and as you come from Young driving towards Roosevelt, Parker Creek, and on the backside of Armour Mountain, some of that Thompson Mesa country, and I know that country down there gets a lot of pressure, but it also has a lot of deer all the way as you wrap around there by Roosevelt Lake. That probably gets the most pressure, but there's probably the most deer there. Would you agree?
Definitely, and there's the most Coues deer, and there's also the most mule deer there too. For some reason, those foothills in between the Armour and all the way down to the lake, they have a ton of deer, and I'm not sure if the deer are there because of the extra feed, or if they know that at some point if they need to go get water, they can get it because they can actually see the lake. But for some reason, there are a bunch of deer, Coues deer and mule deer, in that foothill country there. We've had some decent success in those areas, and don't get me wrong, there's going to be some good bucks in there, but we line hunt actually right through there and have caught toms in saguaros right there. So it's like where those toms are, the deer are going to be, and obviously the population of deer down there, it's pretty thick.
For sure. Let's talk about archery versus rifle. You guys guide a lot of hunters. Do you do a lot of archery deer hunters, or is your main focus rifle Coues deer hunters?
No, we do a few of the archery hunters on there when people want to kill it. It's, as everyone knows, that's a grind. That's an archery deer hunt, especially spot and stock for a mature Coues deer. In my opinion, is the hardest hunt that there is in North America. I mean, I've never been on a Dall sheep hunt, or I've never done anything like that, but I know from the mental grind that it is to try to get within range of a giant deer. In August, it's hot. It's miserable. You're trying to stalk a deer 95, 100 degrees. They're so smart and so weary, and there's so many factors that can help or hurt you in that August hunt. I believe that's the hardest thing you can do, is spot and stalk a giant buck. And I mean, and by giant, I mean something that's 110, 115 plus with your bow. We've had success with guys sitting water with blinds, And I think that's probably the easiest way to kill a buck. But again, that's a mental grind for our hunters a lot of time because they're in a blind. The blind sometimes could be 110 degrees, and they're sweating the entire day. And a Coues deer will come in from dark to dark at any time without any reason except for they want to get a drink of water. So people have to be on their game, and it's just a lot of people aren't used to how the deer are and how sensitive they are to movement or smell. And I feel like Coues deer even have it's a weird sense to where they feel like something's not right. They don't need to go there. And I don't know if other animals have that, but it just seems like with the Coues deer, if everything's not perfect, they'll back out and take off, and they don't need to come back to that water for a couple of days. So, I mean, I think we can have good success on there with that if with the right people that can shoot. And a lot of times on these tanks in certain areas, the shot is a long shot. It's a 40 or 50, sometimes 60-yard shot while sitting down from a blind, and that's a tough shot to make as well.
Yeah, especially the Coues deer, that's such a small target.
Definitely.
Okay.
And then in December, they open it back up in 22 and 23 in December now for the archery, so you can hunt them in the pre-rut and the spot and stock, and then January with the rut hunts too on spot and stock. And if we can do that, and that's a little bit easier of a hunt, but also the key factor in that is to make sure you can get ahead of a buck that you don't know where he's going because he has his head down with his tongue out chasing a doe. So those can be tough too. We're definitely going to find the bucks on both those hunts, but it's up to the hunter to make sure they can put a good stock on to where they can actually shoot that buck who's trying to chase a doe around a hillside that we can barely walk up.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing how they can run and chase does in that country, and you're on basically hands and knees when you try and walk up there, and they're running around chasing does. It's crazy. I want to ask.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We've had a little bit of success too in the past couple years, setting either tree stands or blinds on travel routes during the rut too. So we'll find a scrape line, we'll find some rubs on there, end up setting up a blind or a tree stand on there, and then we've been able to kill a few decent bucks in the past couple years on those travel routes. But that too, I mean, you're going to have to sit and wait, and it's patience, and you're going to have to rely on a doe coming by in that travel route and the buck with his head down trying to figure out where that doe is. So, I mean, that's definitely a chance to kill a good buck, and there's a definite reason why the Pope and Young score for minimum qualifications for Coues deer is so low, because they're the toughest thing to kill with a bow.
Yeah, I think it's like 65. 60,
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. It brings up a good point there. I want to ask all three of you your opinion. The three different seasons, you've got the October rifle, the first hunt, you've got the November rifle, and then you've got, the December, let's call it the late hunt, or, some people call it the rut hunt. If you had to choose, let's say I could give you a tag every single year, would you choose the October, the November, or the December hunt? I want all three of you to answer that. And why?
See, that's a hard question. I would probably choose the October hunt myself, just because we spend so much time in the woods. We're probably going to have that giant buck that just come out of velvet peg, and that's my best chance of killing him. That's why I'd pick October. But it would be a toss-up between October and December for me.
Okay.
Jay, this is Cash. I'd have to say agree with Steele on the October hunt, because when you get them bucks pegged, I mean, you got to wait them out, and you're going to get an opportunity. You just got to capitalize on it. And most of the time it works out, and sometimes it doesn't, but that's where I stand.
Okay.
Hey, Jay, this is Waylon. I would prefer the December hunt. Last year, the hunt was 21 days long, and I like to refer to it as Cousmas because for me, it's the most wonderful time of the year. I love watching those bucks. Yeah, I love watching those bucks rut back and forth. I love it that you have an opportunity to find a big buck on their feet moving. New bucks, The only real con to that late hunt is sometimes you'll have a buck found September, October, November. Then when December comes along, he decides he wants to find a girlfriend and he's gone.
Yeah.
So that's the only major con, as a point to all the other pros on that hunt, is that you can have a buck pegged and he can be gone, but I mean, you have to go re-find him. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
that you bring up a great point there. It's something I want to touch on. And I hear what Cash and Steele are saying for sure about the October hunts and having bucks pegged. And I hear what you're saying, Waylon, about, it temperature-wise, talking from a human perspective, it's a little bit more pleasant, cooler. And then from a deer-wise, seems like they're on their feet. You're having a little more action. You're seeing more deer. Let's talk about, I want you guys to weigh in on actual rutting on that December hunt. Obviously, it runs to December 31st. In your country, in 22 and 23, you've obviously got low and you've got high country. What do you see as far as rutting activity, as far as timing of the seasons? Or, when would you say, yes, we see consistent rutting activity? I mean, do you see some rutting activity on those December hunts? And I'm curious, like dates. Give me actual, last 3 days, last 5 days. Depends on the year, whatever your answer might be, and kind of hear what you have to say about that.
In the higher country, Jay, I would say it's so hit and miss that, I mean, you just got to hunt the whole hunt. I mean, yeah, the last 5 days of the hunt are probably the best, but to be honest with you, I haven't seen them really get it on in that hunt in about 3 years.
Why? Why do you think?
I just think I think they rut in January, in my opinion, nowadays. Up in the higher country, I mean, I can't really speak for the lower country because I haven't got to spend enough time in December down there.
Do you think it's Steele? Do you think it's a density issue, because the higher country does not have as high a density, that maybe they just don't get stirred up and get cranking? I'm always curious about that.
Yeah, that has something to do with it, but I mean, those rut spots they're pocketed too, where there's multiple does, and I just don't think them does I don't think they kick in until January, in my opinion.
Yeah. What about you guys?
But I have them deer are still moving, the bucks are roaming, so yeah, you're going to see about twice as many deer, 3 times as many deer on the December hunt because they are up on their feet. It's cold. They got to get that sun in the morning. They're thinking about it for sure, but they're not really, like when you go to Mexico and you watch a deer, he's so sore he can't even walk. I haven't seen a deer like that in the last 3 years.
Yeah, and Steele, don't you think too, sometimes it's a challenge on that December hunt that you're sitting there glassing and boom, like you were saying, Waylon, a completely new buck shows up, walks across a hillside, just kind of walking, maybe doing a little sniffing, not rutting, but just kind of, roaming. And you see that buck, and he's a beautiful, nice big buck, and you never see the buck again because he's just on a walk.
yeah, definitely. And that's tough too, because a lot of times when we scout and we're looking for our bucks, we'll scout, we'll get video of those bucks, we'll bring the video back, put it on the big screen TV. We'll talk about that buck. What do you think he goes? How big is this deer? What's the mass on this deer? And sometimes on that December hunt, you find a buck and you have to make a decision 2 to 3 minutes on whether this buck's a shooter or not. And that's a lot of pressure to put on, especially because some people are waiting 7, 8, 9 years for that hunt. Whereas opposed to on the October hunt, we usually have the buck, have the video, know about what he's going to go, and know that this buck right here is a 100% shooter. And as soon as we see this deer, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that this deer, it dies. So, I mean, that's another con too, is it's awesome because, I mean, a giant buck might walk in and you might kill a giant. And I know of guys that that's happened to where they've killed bucks 130 plus that they've never seen before in their lives. But, and we've done the same, but also it's a lot less pressure when you know the buck that you're shooting at is the exact buck that you want to kill.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like Cash and Steele talking about, having a target buck and having that October hunt, and that's the buck, and, you're just basically waiting to either A, respot him again, or B, waiting for him to get up out of his bed to shoot him. That's always a reassuring deal that you've analyzed him. He's a shooter. It's not going to be a spur of the moment deal. Like, that's the buck you're after. I think that's one of the huge benefits for October. Guys, Cash, I'm curious your thoughts on rut dates and what you've witnessed and seen as far as consistent rutting out there.
Yeah, I prefer to hunt the last 5 days with the client, and a lot of times, once we're done with our late whitetail hunters, we'll be lion hunting, and that's when, to be honest, I've seen some of the biggest bucks I've ever seen rut a doe across the road, and never see them again. That's when I feel January, is the best time for them to rut, in my opinion.
That you bring up a great point there. How important is it, in trying to educate people that are listening that are into Coues deer? How important is it, in your opinion, to spend time in the rut, so in January, whether you're bow hunting or not, trying to find big bucks? Do you think that's a huge thing that people miss out on, is that they don't get out and find those bucks that are rutting, even though we've already talked about that deer move a lot and that deer might not even be there? How important, though, is it to you guys to go out and spend a bunch of time when they're really rutting around to find a giant, and then maybe try and retrace the steps back to figure out where that buck lives the rest of the year?
Yeah, for sure. You're going to be way further ahead the more time you spend in the country, And then when you do find that giant, he's going to be within, most Coues deer, he's going to be within a mile of that. So it narrows things down for you big time,
For sure. Let's talk about some of those successful Coues hunts that you guys have had, personally, and hunts that you've guided for. I mean, you guys have, I was going through your Instagram page, and I encourage anybody listening to go to GroundPounders on Instagram and just look at the giant bucks that these guys have killed themselves and killed for clients. Talk about some of those successes and some particular bucks that you remember, and just, it's story time. Let's hear some of it.
Yeah, definitely. We've been involved in a few governor tag hunters, and those were awesome. We killed the 147 buck, and that buck at the time was the largest governor tag buck ever killed. The next year, a couple bucks were killed that were bigger than that. One of my favorite bucks, and I think it's one of all our favorite bucks, and that's Cash and Steele's dad, Jimbo, his buck. He ended up killing a 136 typical 3 buck, which is just an awesome specimen of a typical deer. And that was a neat deal because Steele and myself, we were looking, and we found a big buck, and we had some other people there with us. And then Levi went in with his dad, and they killed that buck as a father-son combo, and that was just a neat deal. And also, Dana, which is Cash and Steele's mom, Jimbo's wife, she was there on that hunt too, and that was neat. And she killed a buck that it was about 106, 107 inches on that hunt too. So in a 2-day period, Levi helped his mom and dad kill 2 bucks, both over 107. But that 136 buck is just awesome. It has huge mass, almost 40 inches of mass, just giant beams, giant everything. It's one of my favorite Coues bucks I've ever seen.
I think I'm looking at a picture of it now. It's a giant 3x3 with eye guards that tip in towards each other. It's got huge bases and just big bladed, gnarly. I'd love to see that buck in person. That thing looks like a monster.
Yeah, definitely. We're sitting here holding it in our hands right now while we're talking about it. It was just funny. Me and Steele that day, we got into an argument. We saw the buck.
Wait a minute. You and Steele got into an argument?
Yeah, we did the day we found it.
Is this Cash?
No, this is Waylon.
Waylon. I was going to say, I thought it was Cash saying that Steele and Cash got in an argument, which they're brothers, and I would assume that arguments happen all the time.
all the time. But we found the buck, and we got some video, and the buck was probably about 2,000 yards away. And so I got the scope out real quick, and I got my scope out and put it on it, and I'm like, that's a really big buck there. That's a giant. And then Buck kind of went into some shade and still got his scope on it. And he saw it. And he's like, oh, that's a pretty good buck. And I said, you know, I'm going to go out here. I'm going to walk to this point, and I'm going to refine that buck, and I'm going to get closer and get some better video. I think he's a giant. So I walk out on the point, and then Jimbo was up with us too, their dad. And we walk out, and Jimbo refines the buck, and I get some video of this deer. And I'm looking at the deer, and I just can't believe it. It was the biggest 3-point I've ever seen in my life. So to us, Steele has a buck that's a 120-inch deer that's a 3-point that was a giant. So we're like, that's the biggest 3-point we're going to see. So I radio back to Steele, and I said, Steele, you got to come out here and look at this deer. I think this deer is going to be 135 plus. And so we added some numbers up over the thing, and we Steele thought that we were adding the numbers wrong because we kept coming up with 135 plus on our estimate, and we said that's not possible. So we talked about this deer for 2 or 3 weeks, and I showed Levi the video because he was with an elk hunter at the time. I showed Levi the video, and he told me one word, that's a giant. So
don't you think, though, guys, don't you think mass, though? I mean, you know, we've talked about it on this podcast before. Mass hides length, and I'm looking at this buck, and it's got so much mass that it's deceiving because it hides the length of points, and mass hides length always.
And in proportion, if this buck had normal mass of say 28 inches, if you took those proportions and shrunk everything down, the buck would be 115, 118 proportionally. But then you realize the buck has almost 40 inches of mass, has 6-inch eye guards, 15 inches wide with 20-plus inch beams, and you realize it's just a giant typical, like one we've never seen. The frame on this deer is unreal. The head's so heavy. The eye guards are bladed, and they're just huge. They're 6 inches at least, and they're bigger around. The eye guards are bigger around than your thumb if you hold both your thumbs together at the base. And that's what's crazy about this deer is it was just a pure specimen. And for us, I thought it was neat. We were with hunters at the time, with clients at the time, and that's why Levi was with his mom and dad. But it was just so neat that was the buck that Jimbo got to kill because, I mean, he his whole life has been a lion hunter. He's always been a positive attitude, a guy that was taking all of us to the woods. And he's not even my dad, but he's always taken us to the woods. Always been a part of what we were doing as a guide service. So it was just really neat story to where he ended up killing one of the biggest typicals of all time, the biggest typical 3-points of all time.
I remember seeing the picture come across Instagram, and it immediately made a smile on my face because I know how instrumental Jimbo has been, and I, everybody calls him Jimbo, so I say that with the utmost respect.
Definitely.
It's one of those things that it's so important that, he got rewarded with a giant buck, and I'm sure all of you guys would rather see him shoot the buck than you guys shoot the buck, just because of his instrumental part of, being a part of everything that you guys do, and that's awesome. What other bucks jump out at you as just, Waylon, I think you shot this buck with the super long eye guards.
It has an eye guard that's almost 10 inches long. It's a 9 3/4 inch eye guard. And that was a neat deal. I decided that I was going to have a late hunt. So I waited 8 years to get a late hunt. I didn't draw a tag. And I finally drew the tag on there. And then Levi, I was actually at work there, and Levi called me and said, hey, I think we might have found a buck for you. So I came over. And Levi was with Steele on there, and we came over to the house, and I looked at the video, and I said, that buck is unreal. Like, the eye guard, we couldn't figure out where the eye guard was. We thought the buck was a 4x3 on that side, and we're like, where is the eye guard? And then we went back and got some closer video and realized that point was the eye guard, that it had a 9 3/4 inch eye guard. And that was a neat deal. Me and Levi, we sat on a point for about 4 days. It snowed, fogged in. We were sitting on a rocky ice point. I missed the buck one day, Couldn't believe it. Like, it was probably one of the worst days of my life hunting wise.
Did you catch
Levi
any?
told
Did you
me
catch any flack from the gang?
I walked the 2 miles walk back to the Ranger in about 8 minutes. It was more of a run by myself. Levi told me I should just go ahead and throw that rifle off the mountain.
I'm surprised
So,
he didn't leave you out there.
that's why I got back to the Ranger so fast, because I thought if I didn't get back, I was probably going to be staying the night by myself. So a couple of days later, we refound the buck, and I made an awesome shot, and it was pretty neat. Everyone went over there together. We had all the guys together. Jimbo was there. A neat deal, and that buck ended up going 125 on there. That was neat. Another one of my favorite bucks is we were all guiding over in 23, and Jimbo and his brother, Uncle Bill, we all call him, they had a buck that they had found. Levi had found a buck in an area and said, hey, you guys need to go in here and check this deer out. And they had got burritos that morning from a local Mexican food restaurant. And they were sitting there eating their burritos glassing when this buck stands up on an October hunt. And those guys, Jimbo and Uncle Bill, sat there and finished their burritos before they went down the mountain to kill this deer. And that buck ended up going 133 typical on an October 22 hunt.
That's a 4x4. I'm looking at the picture now.
Yeah.
He's just an awesome buck. He's got really long G3s.
Incredible G3s.
Yeah, and good beams. Just a beautiful 4x4. So it's like the old joke, you hear between the old bull and the young bull. He's like, we've all heard the joke, but I can see them sitting up there on the rock, and they're like, well, it's about time to go down there and kill that buck.
For sure. And another neat story was Steele's father-in-law. We had put in for Coues Deer, and he had never killed a whitetail before. And he drew the lake tag, and that was 2 years ago on there. And we had found a giant buck, and it was, with the client before, couldn't kill it. The client actually couldn't come back into the state. He was too busy with work, and we even had video and showed him. And the guy was sick that he couldn't come back. So we decided to go ahead and kill that buck with Steele's father-in-law. And it was one of the tougher bucks we ever killed. Cold, miserable, nasty. It was windy the entire time. And then 13 days we hunted this buck with Steele's father-in-law. Finally had an opportunity, and he made a great shot and killed the buck. And that buck, we'd see the buck about every 2 days on there, and it was just, the buck would disappear before we could get to it, and the shots were long. But we figured it out and killed that buck, and that buck went over 130 and is just an awesome buck. That's on the Instagram page there as well. It's a non-typical buck. He has on both sides, he has like pitchfork beams at the end, super long G2s. But the funniest thing of that whole buck is he's over 130 and the buck's 12 inches wide.
Isn't that crazy? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That is crazy. Guys, it's been awesome having you on the podcast here. I kind of want to end and conclude with, how do you guys believe your scouting equates to your success? You guys have had unbelievable success killing giant deer. How much of it is your scouting?
Oh, and this is Steele. In my opinion, that's everything, I believe that everybody creates their own luck, you know what I mean? And the time in the woods is just creating your own luck, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's obvious you guys love what you do, and poor Levi, he wasn't there for the podcast. We haven't picked on him at all. He got a free draw on this one. We had a chance to gang up on him, and he wasn't even there to defend himself.
Definitely, he's the big buck finder, though. I will.
He's found more of the big, the majority of the big bucks we've killed. He's been the one to find them. He's just got a knack for sitting there, and it doesn't matter how hot it is, what the situation is. He stays in his glass all day long.
That's awesome. Well, you guys all do a phenomenal job. I want to give you guys a chance to let the listeners know how they can reach you, where they can find out more information about you guys. And I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast, and just look forward to seeing your success this coming year on the elk hunts, and on the deer hunts, and I encourage anyone listening, if they're interested in having a great hardcore group of guys guiding them. These guys do a phenomenal job. Guys, why don't you tell me the different places where people can get a hold of you or can follow more of your hunts?
Yeah, definitely. We're on Instagram and Facebook quite a bit. So Instagram is at azgroundpounders.com. Facebook is Arizona Groundpounders Guide Service. You can give us an email at azgp@live.com. I'm usually available. I'm at 928-517-1337. When Cash or Steel are not in the field, you can give Cash a call, 978-1343, and that's area code 928. I also wanted to let our customers know to follow Cash at azgp_cash on Instagram too, because he puts out some of his other stuff on the Instagram too. Want to let everyone know too that a lot of our success last year has been due to long range shooting. And with the long range shooting, we partnered recently with a company called Best of the West Rifles. And we used them last year, and we were 5 for 5 with our clients with their rifles. And they've been great. So we signed on to become a pro dealer with them. So if anyone needs a long range rifle, Husqvarna optics, anything like that, give us a call too, and we can offer some pretty good pro deal pricing on there. We just love their rifles, and they've been awesome for us. We have a 28 nozzle right now with an effective range that's 1,500 yards plus, which is unreal, and the gun weighs 9 pounds, and we're just in love with it. So we've ordered about 3 or 4 more rifles, and then every hunter that's used these rifles has gone on now and went to buy one of their own. So a lot of our success, and then I just like that too, because a lot of our success on long range shooting last year, it was our equipment, and that helps us be successful in the field, and it would help other people as well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, guys, thanks again for coming on and sharing your knowledge here on the podcast. Like I said, I'm anxious to see your success. I know you guys are going to do fantastic across the board this fall. And as always, I wish you the best. And sorry we missed Levi. Sorry he couldn't be on with us. We'll have to have him on another time. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep knocking down giants, and we'll see you down the road, okay?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And we appreciate the opportunity, and please give us a call anytime, and we'll want to talk about hunting, that's for sure.
That sounds good. Okay, take care, guys.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye.